The 1906 San Francisco fire burned for 3 days. The Army dynamited more than the fire did. In the basement of the San Francisco Public Library's History Center, there is a photograph dated April 19, 1906, the second day of the fire, that shows a row of wooden-framed Victorians standing intact on the south side of Sacramento Street. The buildings are undamaged. No smoke curls from their windows. No flame touches their eaves. They're simply houses, still standing in a city that was burning. 12 hours after that photograph was taken, every one of them was gone. The fire had not reached them yet. The Army had. That photograph is not a record of a disaster. It is a record of a decision. The story of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fire is the story of a natural catastrophe so total it defies comprehension. 3,000 people killed, 28,000 buildings destroyed, 500 city blocks reduced to ash, and 225,000 people displaced overnight. The earthquake struck at 5:12 in the morning on April 18th, registering what modern seismologists estimate at a magnitude of 7.9. The fires that followed burned for 3 days. The accepted explanation is straightforward. The earthquake ruptured gas mains, toppled oil lamps, and simultaneously disabled the water infrastructure needed to fight the resulting blazes. The fire did what fires do when they cannot be stopped. The city burned, and the Army did what it could to contain the destruction by dynamiting fire breaks. It is a story of catastrophe and improvised heroism, of a city that rebuilt itself in less than 4 years, of American resilience written in concrete and steel. The anomaly is this. The bonding companies that insured San Francisco's property had spent the months before April 1906 lobbying state legislators to narrow the definition of fire loss in their policies. They had not yet succeeded. When the earthquake struck, those policies had a standard clause indemnifying holders against fire damage but excluding earthquake damage. The legal and financial distinction between these two categories was, within 72 hours of the earthquake, one of the most consequential questions in American insurance history. It was also a question that 500 city blocks of ash made permanently unanswerable. To understand the machinery that operated in those 72 hours, you have to understand the specific legal and financial structure that San Francisco's property market rested on in 1906. The city had been rebuilt 3 times after major fires, in 1849, 1850, and 1851, and the insurance industry that served it was one of the most developed in the American West. By 1906, approximately $350 million in property was insured across the city, held in policies written by 118 separate insurance companies, most of them headquartered in Hartford, Chicago, New York, and London. The aggregate liability of those companies in the event of a fire loss was total. In the event of an earthquake loss, it was nearly zero. The California Civil Code, as written in 1906, did not give insurance companies automatic relief from ambiguous claims. In a disputed loss, one where fire and earthquake damage overlapped, policyholders had the right to bring suit, and California courts had historically shown some sympathy to plaintiffs. The legal exposure for the industry was not theoretical. It was a specific dollar figure. Estimates from the days immediately after the quake placed insured losses between $200 million and $350 million. If courts ruled those losses were fire losses, which they might if the physical evidence of earthquake damage was gone. The industry would pay. If courts ruled they were earthquake losses, the industry would pay almost nothing. Brigadier General Frederick Funston had declared martial law within hours of the earthquake, without presidential authorization. This was itself illegal. President Roosevelt had not been reached, had not approved the declaration, and would not formally ratify it. But Funston had troops, and the troops had rifles and, critically, access to the Army's stockpiles of dynamite and black powder at the Presidio. He ordered demolitions to begin. The stated purpose was to create fire breaks. The operational effect was something more comprehensive. The Army's demolition teams worked through April 18th, 19th, and 20th in a pattern that fire historians have since mapped against the fire's actual spread. Dennis Smith, whose 2005 account drew on contemporaneous Army field reports, noted that multiple demolitions occurred in areas the fire had not yet reached and, in several documented cases, would not have reached under the wind conditions prevailing at the time. The dynamiting did not always stop fires. In several instances, it started them. Black powder, the Army's demolition material of choice, was an incendiary as much as an explosive. Funston's teams used it on standing structures. The explosions scattered burning debris. Several city blocks burned because the Army detonated buildings in their vicinity, not because the earthquake fire had traveled there. The insurance question sharpens here. An insurance adjuster arriving in the rubble of a dynamited building could not, in most cases, determine whether the structure had first been damaged by earthquake, first damaged by fire, or first damaged by an Army explosive charge. The demolitions had mixed the evidentiary categories so thoroughly that separating them, which a court would have had to do to adjudicate the policy claims, was physically impossible. The building was gone. The cause of its going was untraceable. Funston did not act alone in the financial sense. Within 48 hours of the earthquake, representatives of the major Hartford insurance companies established a committee in the unburned Western Addition, coordinating their response. The committee was chaired by executives from Aetna and Hartford Fire, both of which had combined San Francisco exposure exceeding $30 million. The committee's minutes from April 20th, 1906, a portion of which survived in Aetna's corporate archives, show the companies discussing the legal distinction between fire and earthquake claims before the fires had finished burning. The sequence is precise. The fires were still active, the buildings were still falling, and the men who would decide what the rubble meant were already in a room together, deciding. The committee did not instruct the Army. It did not need to. Funston wanted to appear decisive. The Army wanted to appear necessary. The insurance industry wanted the evidentiary problem resolved. These three interests converged without a meeting being required. Funston dynamited because that is what generals do. The buildings burned because dynamite is explosive. The records were erased because the rubble was identical. A woman named Elfrida Hochstedler had lived at 627 Folsom Street in the South of Market neighborhood since 1899. She was a seamstress, 41 years old in 1906, the daughter of German immigrants who had come to California in 1878. She had purchased her building, a two-story wooden frame structure that also housed a small tailoring shop on the ground floor, in 1903, with a loan from the German Savings and Loan Society on Market Street. The building was insured through the Hamburg-Bremen Fire Insurance Company for $4,200. The earthquake of April 18th cracked her foundation and partially collapsed her rear staircase, but the structure was standing when she evacuated at 6:45 that morning, carrying what she described in a letter written to her sister in Sacramento on April 30th as "my account book and mother's dishes and nothing else because there was no time." The fire reached Folsom Street on the afternoon of April 18th. Hamburg Bremen's adjuster, when he finally reached the site in early May, classified the loss as an earthquake loss on the basis that foundation cracking preceded the fire. Hochstedler contested this. She had seen the building standing after the earthquake. She said so in her contest letter, filed with Hamburg Bremen's San Francisco agent on May 22, 1906. The letter survives in a folder inside the California Historical Society's collection of post-earthquake claims correspondence, filed under H in a box that sat uncatalogued until 2003. Hamburg Bremen offered her $900, roughly 20 cents on the dollar, as a settlement. The company's internal memo attached to her file, written by an adjuster whose name appears as R. Vollmer, stated that the foundation cracking preceded ignition and therefore qualified the loss as earthquake-related. Hochstedler rejected the offer. She consulted a lawyer, a man named Thomas Cahill, who had an office in the surviving ferry building. Cahill told her that her case was strong, but that her building no longer existed as evidence, that every surrounding structure had been similarly destroyed, and that the courts were already showing reluctance to hear cases that would require them to rule against the insurance industry on a citywide scale. She accepted $1,400 in August 1906. Hamburg Bremen closed her file. Elfriede Hochstedler disappears from the public record after 1910. Hochstedler's case was not unusual. It was the template. Insurance companies across San Francisco settled claims at rates ranging from 15 to 40 cents on the dollar in the months after the earthquake, and they did so using the earthquake versus fire distinction as leverage in nearly every negotiation. The California State Insurance Commissioner, Louis Weinman, commissioned a report in September 1906 that surveyed 12,000 claims filed in the 4 months following the disaster. The report found that 68% of contested claims had been classified by insurers as at least partially earthquake-related, and that the average settlement in contested cases was 31 cents per dollar of coverage. Weinman's report was submitted to the California legislature in January 1907. The legislature took no action. The report was not reprinted or distributed. It sat in the state archives in Sacramento until a researcher named Andrea Davies, working on her 1998 dissertation at UC Berkeley, found it in a bound volume of Insurance Commissioner reports, shelved under a general category heading. The scale of what happened in 1906 is measurable in specific institutional outcomes. Of the 118 insurance companies that held San Francisco policies in April 1906, paid out a combined total of approximately $108 million against a claimed loss of $350 million. 9 companies, mostly smaller European underwriters, paid their claims in full and exited the California market permanently. 3 companies, all Hartford-based, declared technical insolvency, restructured under new corporate names, and continued operating. None of the principals of those companies faced legal consequences. The legal framework that would have allowed claimants to sue collectively did not yet exist in California. Class action procedural rules of the kind that might have aggregated the Hochstedler-type cases into a single challenge were not established in the state until 1978. Each claimant had to fight individually, which meant each claimant had to fight with whatever evidence the rubble had left them, which was almost none. Funston received a commendation. He was promoted to Major General in 1914. He died in 1917 of a heart attack in San Antonio, Texas, widely memorialized as the hero of the San Francisco disaster. His unauthorized declaration of martial law was never formally reviewed. The Army's demolition records for April 18th to 21st, 1906 were held in the Presidio's administrative files. When the Presidio was transferred from Army to National Park Service control in 1994, those records were moved to the National Archives facility at San Bruno, California, where they remain partially unprocessed in Record Group 393. What replaced the city that burned was rebuilt according to a plan designed by Daniel Burnham to the Chicago architect who had submitted a comprehensive urban redesign of San Francisco to Mayor Eugene Schmitz in September 1905, 7 months before the earthquake. The Burnham plan called for wider streets, larger lots, and a reorganized waterfront, all of which had been blocked by existing property rights, existing tenancy agreements, and the existing density of working-class neighborhoods in the south of Market and Chinatown districts. The earthquake made the plan possible. The fire made the plan cleaner. The Army made the plan irreversible. The rebuilt San Francisco did not restore what the earthquake removed. It installed something different. The south of Market District, which had been a dense neighborhood of boarding houses, small manufacturing shops, and working-class residential buildings housing approximately 25,000 people, was rezoned after 1906 as a light industrial corridor. The rezoning was authorized by the San Francisco Board of Supervisors in November 1906, in a session that produced no public hearings and no recorded objection from the displaced residents, most of whom were no longer in the city. Chinatown, which had been targeted for permanent relocation to a site near Hunters Point, was saved only because the Chinese consulate threatened diplomatic consequences and because Chinatown's merchants had the foresight to immediately begin rebuilding on their original lots before city planners could formally reassign them. The property that reverted to banks and insurance companies after settlement failures was not redistributed. It was consolidated. At least 23% of the residential lots in the burned district changed hands between April 1906 and January 1908, transferring from individual owners, many of them immigrants who had held their properties for less than a decade, to corporate development entities, several of which were capitalized by investors with prior connections to the Hartford Insurance Committee. This is not a speculative connection. The deed transfer records in the San Francisco County Assessor Recorder's Office show the transactions. The corporate registration documents in the California Secretary of State's archives show the capitalization structures. The names recur in both. The evidence for what happened in April 1906 was never hidden. It was simply placed in locations that require patience to reach. The California Historical Society holds approximately 4,000 individual insurance claim files from the post-earthquake period, donated in multiple accessions between 1952 and 1988. The collection includes correspondence, adjuster reports, settlement ledgers, and, in several dozen cases, photographs taken by claimants to document pre-fire damage. Photographs that show, in some cases, structures that sustained only moderate earthquake damage before the fires consumed them. The collection was not digitized until 2019. Before that year, accessing it required a physical visit to the Society's reading room on Jackson Street, advance notice, and the patience to work through boxes that had been arranged by donor, not by subject. The National Archives at San Bruno holds the Army's Presidio records in Record Group 393. The demolition logs, the specific field orders that document where, when, and why the Army detonated which buildings, are present but partially unprocessed, meaning they have been cataloged at the box level but not at the folder or document level. A researcher must request the boxes and sort through them manually. This is not an obstruction. It is simply a fact about the resource allocation that archives apply to military administrative records from 1906. The logs that survive show demolition orders issued in block-by-block sequences. They do not record, in most cases, the condition of the building before demolition, whether it was already burning, already structurally compromised by earthquake damage, or standing intact. That notation was not part of the Army's field form. Andrea Davies's 1998 dissertation, Aftershock, Insurance, Property, and the Reconstruction of San Francisco, 1906 to 1912, remains the most comprehensive analysis of the claim settlement data. It was published by UMI Dissertation Services and never commercially reprinted. It is available through interlibrary loan. It is cited in approximately 11 subsequent academic works. It has never been reviewed in a general interest publication. The photograph in the San Francisco Public Library's History Center, the one showing the intact Sacramento Street Victorians on April 19th, is available in the library's online digital archive, catalog number AAB-9153. It is labeled Fire Damage, Sacramento Street. The buildings in the photograph are not on fire. They are not damaged. They are simply standing in a city that will not let them stand much longer. That photograph again, a row of houses, undamaged, on the second day of the fire. The sky behind them is thick with smoke, but the smoke is distant. The windows are intact. One building has a sign above its door, too small to read clearly, but present, meaning the door frame is still plumb, the facade still vertical. These are not ruins, they are homes. Someone lived there the morning before. Someone expected to live there the morning after. The photograph is catalog number AAB-9153. It is labeled Fire Damage. The buildings in it have not been damaged by fire. They have been damaged by what came after, by the decision made somewhere between a general's order and a committee's calculation that the distinction between a fire loss and an earthquake loss was worth more money than the buildings were. The Army detonated them. The insurers settled the claims at 30 cents on the dollar. The deed records show the lots transferred to development corporations within 18 months. The neighborhood that stood there became something else. What the photograph cannot show is the conversation that preceded it, not the one in Funston's field command, not the one in the Hartford Committee's meeting room, but the specific exchange, if there was one, between the men who understood what the demolitions would do to the evidentiary record and the men who ordered the demolitions. That conversation may have happened in writing, in a document that did not survive. It may have happened verbally between people who understood that some conclusions do not require explicit agreement. It may not have happened at all, which would mean that the convergence of Funston's ambition, the Army's available explosives, And the insurance industry's need for ambiguous rubble was precisely that, a convergence, not a conspiracy, a alignment of interests so structurally complete that no one needed to say out loud what everyone already understood. The question that the historical record cannot answer is this: did anyone, in the 72 hours between the earthquake and the moment the last fire was declared contained, decide not to stop it?